Welcome, everyone, to this Keystone Symposium on Reimagining Scientific Conferences. Today, we will explore pandemic lessons in reducing carbon footprint, engaging new audiences, and rethinking strategies for scientific exchange. Thank you for joining us for these important conversations regarding the future of scientific conferencing as we navigate re-entry into a post-pandemic world. I'm Shannon Weiman, the Director of Program Development and Scientific Communications at Keystone Symposia, and I'll be hosting the event today. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers for you, featuring innovators in virtual and hybrid conference design, leaders in platform technologies, and diverse conference organizations to share their experiences and expertise. Together, we will explore the benefits, challenges, and solutions for virtual and hybrid meetings and determine best practices moving forward. Ultimately, we aim to outline novel ways to enhance community engagement, promote collaboration, and drive scientific advances through new conferencing tools and formats. To begin our program today, I'd like to introduce our meeting organizers to share with you their inspiration and vision for this event. I give you Dr. Debbie Johnson, the President and CEO of Keystone Symposia, and her co-organizer, Dr. Judith Klinman of the University of California, Berkeley.
Well, good morning and welcome, everyone. As Shannon said, which I want to first thank her for all the work that she's done in putting this conference together. I'm Debbie Johnson, President and the CEO of Keystone Symposia. For those of you that don't know us, we're a nonprofit organization that is currently celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. We generally convene between 55 and 60 global meetings every year that are focused on basic and translational life science research in areas that span genetics and biochemistry to cancer immunotherapy and vaccinology. So during the last 3 years, I think we can all agree we've faced unprecedented times. The pandemic thwarted our ability to convene in-person conferences for 2 years, much longer than any of us had anticipated. And in doing so, it really has forced us to reconsider how to best engage our scientific communities beyond our traditional in-person events. Many of us experimented with virtual meetings with varying degrees of success, and there were many lessons learned. So we thought now is a good time for us to come together and reflect on these experiences, to share both our successes and our challenges, and to explore what opportunities that we might avail going forward as we adjust to reconvening in-person meetings and adapt to new hybrid formats. So given our experiences and some of yours, I think in my mind there are 3 key issues amongst others that I'd like to see us address during these next 2 days. First, how can we produce virtual and hybrid events in a more cost-effective manner? I think that's an important factor. For the hybrid events, how can we better engage the in-person attendees with those that are attending virtually to catalyze interactions, connections, and collaborations? And third, how do we optimize networking opportunities in virtual formats that best reflect the serendipitous interactions that we all value in in-person events? So I look forward to hearing from all of you, and I really hope that this meeting inspires new ideas that will transform how we engage our scientific communities in the future. So thank you again for being here, and now I will turn it over to my co-organizer, Judith.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm thrilled that we're actually seeing this event take place. First of all, I want to thank all of you for coming and participating in our conference, Reimagining Scientific Conferences. And I first want to shout out the invaluable contributions of Debbie, Shannon Weiman from Keystone Symposia, and Eowyn Mader from UC Berkeley, who have worked consistently and hard over the last several years to bring this meeting to fruition. As disastrous as COVID has been in the US and around the world, we have learned important lessons about how to stay connected and how to adapt quickly to new ways of interacting. At the same time, the climate emergency contributes to barrel ahead, with CO2 emissions continuing to rise despite the promise from nations around the world to achieve either a plateau in CO2 emissions or to reduce emissions of CO2. And as we speak, 2022 UN Climate Change Conference is in progress, COP27, where the key issues of mitigation and adaptation are being discussed. One of the most compelling issues is how urgent it is that we act quickly as we move into a regime where large-scale and irreversible damage is taking place. We have reached a new status quo where the economic cost of prevention and mitigation has become less than the economic cost of recovery from the damage incurred. Just as the burden to move forward constructively within the international community lies predominantly with the rich nations, our community of scientists also has a major role to play. For example, in the ongoing development of much needed new technologies, and certainly CO2 capture is a big part of that, in disseminating the truth of the scientific basis for the environmental destruction that is rapidly accelerating rather than diminishing. And finally, in setting examples of how thoughtful changes can be implemented that may both enhance the vibrancy of the scientific community and help to mitigate global warming. My hope is that this meeting will jumpstart a conversation and initiatives that address the challenges and inconvenience of climate change and promote responsible behavior and principles among the contributing societies and general scientific community. It's clear that we're going to need to iron out differences in experience and opinions and ultimately to set out possible roadmaps toward shared practices. As a community of creative working scientists, technicians, and administrators, we can face the challenges with new views of how to move forward. And it's also important to remember that introduced changes aren't necessarily forever, but they are urgently needed now to mitigate the circumstances of this critical time in our planet's future. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie and Judith. Now it's time to kick off our keynote session, highlighting different perspectives on how and why to invest in virtual and hybrid conference formats in a post-pandemic era. Each of our speakers will give a 20-minute talk, followed by a group discussion and Q&A. You can submit your questions for our speakers at any time into the Q&A chat box. Please specify if your question is for a specific speaker. Everyone is encouraged to vote on the questions submitted so we can gauge audience interest in the various questions. And now, please join me in welcoming our first keynote speaker, Dr. Walter Greenleaf, a neuroscientist and digital medicine expert at Stanford University's Virtual Human Interaction Lab. Dr. Greenleaf will be talking to us about designing virtual interactions to catalyze connection and collaboration.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be with you today. And for my topic, I will be discussing virtual world technology and how it will be used moving forward for virtual meetings and other applications. I'm a behavioral neuroscientist working at Stanford University, but I also have a focus on how can we apply virtual reality technology to clinical care and to promote health and wellness. So in the course of my presentation to you, I will be discussing both virtual world technology and some of the challenges we have as we start rolling it out. Where is it now and where can it be? And how it will impact both science, research, and I'll give some examples from the clinical care community. So there's a little bit of a nomenclature issue that I always run across when talking about virtual reality technology and augmented reality technology. We're now starting in the field to use the phrase immersive systems because with the variety of different ways of being part of a virtual world, sometimes we experience the virtual world by looking at a webcam, but seeing in front of us a three-dimensional interactive world. Sometimes we place something on our head that allows us to either overlay the real environment with extra information, and in some cases we also can interact with that extra information. So there is a bit of a nomenclature going on. But one thing's for sure, now is the time that virtual environment technology, immersive technologies, VR and AR technology, XR technology, now is the time, despite the evolution of the nomenclature, now is the time for these technologies to start impacting our world. And I'll give some examples of where we are and where we're going. We're already seeing examples of how virtual environments will be part of the next computer platform, impacting how we work, how we play, our educational systems, our social systems, and to the focus of this conference, how we sometimes meet each other and exchange information in scientific conferences. The terms that we're shuffling around right now, we use the term VR, to virtual reality, to indicate a fully immersive system that blocks out the outside world. We use the term augmented reality to talk about overlaying the real world with extra information. Mixed reality is when we are able to interact with that extra information. And now we're starting to use the term XR, or extended reality, to talk about the spectrum of those systems. And they're gaining momentum rapidly. If we look at the adoption curve for technologies, look at the color TV or the video cassette recorder or the personal computer, and we look at the adoption rate of augmented and virtual reality technology, we're actually adopting VR and AR technology at a faster rate than we did with some of the previous technologies, including that of the cell phone. And for my focus, I tend to look at how this is going to impact health and wellness and clinical care. We're in the middle of a digital health revolution right now, which is enabling moving these technologies to the mainstream and the enterprise. The focus of the digital health revolution is the patient. No longer is the hospital the point of care, especially engendered by the pandemic. We're moving to distributed ways of reaching patients. And again, this will impact the evolution of virtual world technology, and that will impact, as part of that evolution, where we start having our meetings and conferences. So what I've seen in the last while is the evolution of all of our research devices and clinical devices moving from the handwritten and analog world to the digital world. We're entering the era of medical wearables, where information is collected sometimes 24/7 by things that we affix to our bodies or implant in our bodies. We're also seeing the evolution of new ways of understanding our behavior. We can use our voice tones as an analytic for anxiety or depression or pain. We can capture facial expressions and other signals to indicate our cognitive attention and status. And we can evaluate our brain health, often just by looking at the passive data that we collect from our cell phone technology. This is allowing us to build a tremendous system with clinician and research scientists facing dashboards with information, ideally information that's kept very secure and private, and then a variety of patient-facing applications in the immersive worlds that we can use for research and for clinical trials and for clinical care. And as we collect more data, ideally, again, protected and secure, we start to be able to implement more interactions. We're also seeing some tremendous changes, again, empowered by the need to adapt to the pandemic, with shifting business models of the tech titans. Apple, Google, Samsung, Amazon are all jumping into the virtual environment arena and to clinical care. We've had to shift our regulations of approving medical devices that are distributed over the internet and virtual worlds, telemedicine. And then we're also shifting to pay attention to our mental health and the impact of how we interact with each other, such as video conferencing, on our mental health. There's a number of emerging and confluent technologies that are supporting this move to virtual world environments. And again, my focus has been on the clinical environment, so the examples will be mostly from there. We're seeing sensors and the evolution of the Internet of Things, where sensors are promulgating and embedded into almost all the devices that we use. We're seeing the application of machine learning and predictive analytics to these large data sets. This allows us to make sense of all the data that we're collecting from the sensors. We're seeing ways that we can take the signals that we collect both in the virtual world environments and as we use VR and AR technology and understand the user by paying attention to eye gaze, facial expressions, voice tone, behavior within the virtual environments. We can come up with an individual score of how one can handle different levels of complexity and cognitive load. This helps us adapt the virtual world environment to the individual. And with an aging population and often mild cognitive impairment and neurodegenerative disease, we're able to adapt the interface and how we express information to the individuals to match their cognitive styles and emotional status. And again, because we're entering the era of medical wearables, we're collecting a lot of information that allows us to personalize the interaction with the virtual world technology. This is important because we do need to understand our cognitive state and our emotional state in order to best utilize the technology that will be part of our future of how we meet, socialize, work, play, recreate, educate, etc. We're also starting to come up with a concept, migrating it from the manufacturing world to the virtual world technologies of coming up with a digital twin that represents us, our cognitive state, our emotional state, our physiology, our behavior, our preferences, and our goals as part of the avatars that we use as we participate in virtual worlds. 5G connections are allowing us to push all this complex information. We can render it in the cloud and with edge computing provided to the user with light frame glasses. So the current head-mounted displays that we're using are often bulky and unwieldy. Fortunately, they're not very expensive right now. You can get a very good VR system for $300, for example, the third of the cost of a smartphone. But they are sometimes a bit uncomfortable to wear, but with 5G promulgating, we will be able to do cloud-based rendering and have the display systems be much more lightweight and unobtrusive and will look less silly when we wear them. We're also starting to add extra dimensions of sensory input. For example, we now can bring dimensional smell experiences so that one can be in a virtual world, hold up a bouquet of roses and smell them. The smell gets stronger as you move closer. You can turn around and smell the lawn being mowed behind you. It's actually quite remarkable how robust those systems can be. So as we start moving to virtual world platforms as our way to interact with each other, there are some amazing things we can do, but there are also some challenges. We have the enabling technology and the enabling tools. We're working on the content. We have to be careful to make sure that the content and the data sets that we capture are diverse and age appropriate and culturally appropriate and secure and safe. And that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we have right now. But we are starting to already see what's called the Metaverse, where virtual world technology is shared in a distributed manner, a persistent, freight-iterated intersection of virtual worlds, different platforms with some common ways of connecting over those platforms and common ways of interacting. It's evolving, but we're gradually getting there. And again, this is where a lot of our work and our socializing and our education will take place moving forward. We'll be able to reach underserved populations because of it. But again, we have to be careful to make sure that we design to not exclude groups or build into our data sets biased sets. So it's really quite amazing, some of the virtual world technologies that are out there. How many of you have had a chance to use the virtual world? More than I thought. See, it's gaining in preponderance. but they can sometimes be photorealistic. And but there are some challenges that we see in evolving virtual worlds right now. If done correctly, we can address some of the concerns that are one of our current ways of having group meetings and interacting with each other over video calls. These are often extremely exhausting. There's a reason for this, but a lot of it boils down to an aspect of human behavior. It's actually stressful for us to be looking at talking heads for hours upon hours. Normal human interactions, we move around the room. We don't always keep our gaze on the other person. We communicate non-verbally with each other, both by what we do, how we position ourselves, where we look, what we say, how we say it. And a lot of this is put down through a real filter as we interact over video conferencing. Of course, it's better than some of the interactions that we had been using previously to only interact with remote team members, for example, by typing or texting or audio, but it still leaves us exhausted. And there's been a lot of interesting research as to the reasons why video conferencing can be exhausting. And the hope is that virtual world technology, by being more natural, will allow us to step over some of those limitations that we see in video conferencing technology. But we're not there yet. Virtual worlds currently are sometimes very silly, sometimes very challenging. Our avatars often look like robots. They don't have the right kinesthetic movements. In Meta's world horizons, for example, our legs are missing. We don't have easy ways to capture or extrapolate the inverse kinematics necessary to have full motion. And frankly, our avatars are rude. If several avatars are talking to each other and another person walks up to join the conversation, it takes a while to reshuffle, welcome them into the group, something that we do automatically when we're interacting with a group of people, as we don't even think about it. But in virtual worlds, our gestures, our body language, our facial expressions, by and large, are horrible. And that's one of the things we need to work on before people will be able to effectively use virtual worlds for meetings and social interactions, education, etc. However, I'll describe briefly some of the solutions that are underway to address this concern. I think a lot of this will be helped by the work that's going on in effective computing. I think the data sets and the heuristics that we will be getting out of what's currently in the medical research arena will be applied to virtual world technology and hopefully make our interactions, our avatars, and our behaviors as transmitted in the virtual world much more engaging and appropriate. Effective computing is the study and development of systems that can interpret and process our human affects, our human emotions. We can do this by capturing a variety of different signals, such as facial expressions, body language, voice tones, and we can use those analytics to evaluate someone's emotional state. And this is going to be a big part of our future. We are the tech companies, as they evolve the interaction technology that we use, the computers, the phones, the immersive world systems that are part of what we'll be using to connect with each other, they will try and personalize it. They will want to be able to understand our moods, our cognitive status, and our goals, and adapt our technology to us. And that will be a good thing. And I think it will have a positive impact on virtual worlds. We're already harvesting information about nonverbal communication and body language and facial gestures, and using this as part of adapting technology to us. And I think we can anticipate that our smart cars, for example, will be paying attention to our mood, to our cognitive status, and adapting their behavior to be more efficient and feel more comfortable for us. Our built environment will also leverage adaptive sensing to adjust to us and to the people that are in the room. But we have to do a lot of work in interpreting all the signals that indicate cognitive and emotional state. It's a complex area, and we need to make sure that as we do this, that the data sets that we use to move people into the virtual world and represent them are not biased. But we're making progress. There are systems where it used to be that and still is by and large the case, that avatars look very robotic and did not look or sound like us. But we can change that now. We can have them using AI systems recognize our facial gestures, our voice tones, and map them to an avatar that may look like us, or we may choose to filter the data and have things look differently. But we have the ability now to technically to have more realistic looking avatars that look and sound the way we'd like them to be. And I should mention at this point, why is this important and what are the applications that I and my colleagues are very excited about of using virtual environment technology as part of clinical care. One of the reasons we're starting to use virtual environments is because they are a very effective way of engaging and promoting clinical adherence to often difficult products. We can leverage the brain's neuron systems. For example, at our lab at Stanford, we've done some research on how age progressing your avatar and having your avatar have a conversation with you, your future self, can affect your behavior and help you understand the importance of doing sometimes the difficult thing of exercising or saving for retirement or working on better nutrition, etc., or maybe changing your behavior with alcohol. These systems have impact because they activate, instead of just a narrow bandwidth of activation of the brain, we can leverage the brain's reward systems and give feedback because people are more fully engaged. The other thing that we can do is we can activate the brain's reward system and memory system. And I think what's most exciting is that we can put the power of story into these interactions, much like we do in the entertainment and gaming arena. We can leverage the brain's association with narrative stories and bring that to how we interact with each other by the avatars and the backstories that we choose to convey in virtual world technology. So in summary, I think we're entering into a new era of both research and clinical care and understanding human cognition and emotional expression and how that can be mapped to the avatars in a virtual world. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. And the enabling technologies that are emerging hand in hand with this will facilitate better virtual world interactions. So I'll pause here and let my colleagues continue with their presentations, but I hope I've conveyed to you my excitement about where we can go with virtual world technology and also some of the challenges that we're currently addressing that hopefully will be resolved soon. Thank you very much.
Very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Greenleaf. Our next speaker is Dr. Felix Rondell, co-founder of futurehain, a solution studio at the intersection of science, innovation, and society. Mr. Rundel leverages creative meeting design with the power of interdisciplinary collaboration to tackle grand challenges facing the world today. He will be talking to us about virtual and hybrid conference design for optimal outcomes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Felix. It's a great pleasure being here with you today. First of all, thanks, Walter, for that really amazing presentation, glimpse into the future of meetings. Thanks to Judith, Deborah, and Shannon for setting this up. I think it's an incredibly timely and important topic to think about where we're going next with academic conferences and what the future might look like. I want to say happy birthday to Keystone Symposia as well. And yeah, thanks for having me. To all of you out there in front of your screens, I hope you're cozy and comfortable. I'm currently in Berlin, Germany, in my office. It's in the PMs, late afternoon. So wherever you are, thanks for joining. I'm talking about some similar themes as Walter did, about technology, about humans, about the power of story. But I'm really coming from a very different perspective. And that starts with me, first of all, not being a scientist. I am what some people might refer to as a creative strategist, a consultant, and a meeting designer. And what that means, if you don't have a concept of this yet, I'll explain that in a few minutes. I run an agency out of Berlin. It's called futurehain, and we work with international science partners, people, organizations, associations run on science and working with science to help them with strategy, communications, and congresses, conference concepts. So this is basically where I'm coming from. For the last 15 years or so, I worked between these two worlds as kind of a wanderer between the worlds, the world of science and scientific institutions, and the big world of events, professional business events, the events industry, as if you will. And one part of my career journey and one focus was really always to try and bring these two worlds a bit closer together. So what I'm telling you today has a lot to do with that, bringing in insights from the world of professional business events. There are a lot of trends and tendencies that we can apply and work with in the scientific world. And what you see here is a conference that I curated for many years, for 8 years in a physical form. That's the photos you see here, but also in a virtual form. It's an international interdisciplinary science conference based in Berlin, the Falling Walls Conference. And some of the experiences that I'm sharing are from some of the cases that happened there in the last few years. So back to my presentation title. Yes, virtual and hybrid conference design for optimal outcomes. I'll be focusing on the reimagining part a lot, asking the question, how can we build better science conferences in the here and now? How can we affect change today by applying different methods, different mindsets to our events, to our conferences? And how can we create better user experience, delegate experience, participant experience, however you want to name that, for the people that come to our conferences. And so it's a very human-focused approach. You will see it's a very design-oriented focus. And before I talk a little bit about these insights, about the mindsets and models, I really want to zoom out and really look at this topic from a bird's eye and even further out. Look at the scientific conference as a technology, as in itself. So if we take scientific conferences as a technology, I think Judith has hinted at that. We look at a platform that needs to be a catalyst for scientific exchange, for the advancement in science. It is a platform that connects scientists within and across disciplines. Of course, it's in many cases an opportunity for career development, professional, but also personal developments among scientists. And it's a platform for disseminating breakthroughs and new scientific advancements to broader society. Ultimately, it's also about sustainably building communities, launching and stirring new collaboration. And under the bottom line, if we look at this technology, the science conference, what it needs to do is accelerate insights that will benefit society. So how do we build for this? How do we accelerate and expand this technology as we go into the future? And what has happened in the past, we've learned, of course, that technology and design do not stand still. I'm going to show you a few almost stereotypical slides that you might have seen before. Of course, technology advances in functionality. Take the dumb phone to smartphone development and think about what that means for academic conferences. Technology changes in design and how it is produced and how it is tailored to audiences. And that, of course, also has to do with zeitgeist, with changing consumption patterns and how we like to use our technology. And this is certainly also true for scientific conferences. So we're seeing some change there. I'll get back to that in a minute. The structure of technology has, of course, changed. This is now a building analogy, but of course, think about the structure of academic events and how this has been advancing over the last years or decades. So I'll break it down to the $1 million or €1 million question, what is happening with scientific conferences? How is this technology progressing over the years, over the last decades? Again, I traveled extensively to academic conferences in Europe, in the US, and the images you see here from face-to-face events are still the standard. These are not historical photographies. This is still what you see everywhere. So where is this, where are we standing now, and how are we pushing into the future with this platform? I think that's a very important question to focus on. And then, of course, that's why we are here to discuss about reimagining scientific conferences. We've been disrupted in our scientific conference world. The pandemic has really led to an acceleration of change, a massive digitalization of events, and we are going to see more pressure on this field by climate change, by global warming, and the other related effects, biodiversity loss, much stronger regulations, etc. Kate will address this in the next talk. I know that, so I'll keep it there. But how are these pressures affecting change in our field? Yeah, of course, as I said, Kate will address this. There's a huge opportunity in using virtual events to cut the carbon footprint in this very intense, carbon-intense meetings industry in general, and also scientific conferences should take the lead in cutting down carbon footprints. So here are a couple of quotes and insights from recent papers. Again, I'll leave this to Kate, but there's another aspect that we have to talk about, and this is not really dependent on the question whether we are running physical events, face-to-face events, or virtual events. We have a problem that we had to face already before the conference, and I talked about this a lot pre-pandemic. There is a dissatisfaction with how conferences are run and have been run. The very provocative newspaper screenshots you see here are just representative of that. And it has to do with changing user needs. Again, there are, of course, also new generations of researchers coming into academia. They have changing needs. Generation X, millennials, they are changing consumption patterns everywhere we look in society. And this is rapidly accelerating. And the zeitgeist, again, referring to design, referring to how we visually like to perceive conferences, about how we want to go through conference experiences and conference journeys. I'll touch that in a minute. That is all changing, and there's oftentimes we ask ourselves the question, why do we make this investment of time, of money, and of our attention to travel to faraway conferences and then find ourselves, in dark rooms with stale air, with bad coffee, and we all had these experiences. So back to an overview of the evolution of events, or what some might say is the evolution of scientific events, from in-presence to virtual, then hybrid, then VR, AR, and Web3, Metaverse, you might add. Walter touched upon some of these stages in the development, but I would really contest this view of a simple linear evolution in academic events, and I would much rather add a different dimension of development, and a dimension in innovation that we need to look at. And that is an innovation that not only has to do with the medium, i.e. moving from face-to-face events in the real world to virtual events on platforms, but also in the craft of how we design these events. Let me tell you what I mean with that. The meeting design model that we are using for setting up academic conferences, science congresses, expos to do with technology and innovation is built on this principle. Again, architectural metaphor for cohesive meeting design. So we want to build a structure, an event, a meeting that is holistically planned from a strategic point of departure, thinking about the purpose, thinking about the objectives for us as an organization, the objectives also for our target group. Then around that, we tailor a consistent narrative that you can think of as the facade of this building, a compelling, attractive storyline, a narrative that will communicate to the target group what this event is about, what we're trying to achieve together, why you should invest your time and your money and attention to go there or to be there virtually. And then as the inside, the interior functions of this event structure, we think about, what are the formats that we need to apply? What are the contents that we need to deliver there? And ultimately, this experience layer, how do we want our delegates to feel when they navigate through the structure? So this is a bit abstract at this point, but I think the architectural metaphor is very appropriate. Having aesthetic, visually compelling, but a highly functional and overall holistic structure that we build from scratch. That's the goal. And how do we do that? We apply a design process. And here's a small hint. This design process is the same for physical face-to-face events and virtual events, but it's even more important for virtual events where we need to activate engagement. We need to activate the feeling of commitment of, it's important for me as a delegate to be there, to join in this experience. So this design process, as mentioned before, it has to do, first of all, with identifying the purpose, the why, what change in the real world do we want to affect with this meeting? Why should everyone take their time out of their calendars and attend this meeting? What can they get out of it? And how do we move on afterwards? What's the sustainability? This context, not the ecological, but the social, societal sustainability of this event. We clarify the objectives, and we don't move on in the planning process before we didn't clarify all the objectives for us as an organization, for our partners, and for the people that we want to join in. For that, we also really need to have a very good knowledge of our audiences. Sometimes we can use data from previous events. That's the beauty of virtual event platforms, that we can get a lot of data and insights on how our audiences navigate on these platforms, how their attention spans work with our formats, and much more. And then ultimately creating these stories, build based on the purpose, the narrative of why this event matters, and building structures, and ultimately the emotional experiences that will lead us through this conference. Here's an overview of a few building principles. These virtual events should be designed with the user in mind. So a very user-centric design manner that shall lead to better engagement, activate people's engagement, more efficiency in getting to results and outcomes. And we need to know what kind of needs and requirements our audiences come into the conference with, what kind of questions they are struggling with, and how we can bring them into collaboration to solve those together. I mentioned the aspect of purpose-driven design. This is not just about a shared narrative. I always call this the power core of a conference, of an event. If we are able to tap into this shared purpose that everyone thinks is extremely important and relevant, we can really activate enormous energy in the community that can last for much, much longer than one individual event. Then we want to make sure that we build our virtual events to be activating, of course. So not only frontal input from distinguished keynote speakers, but also leaving a lot of pockets and niches and opportunities for delegates to come together, connect socially, also emotionally. We know that it's attending scientific conferences is not only about professional connections and development, but there are also a lot of personal motivations that are coming into play. So provide some space for that. Also be creative in framing these spaces and setting social cues that show, we have low hierarchies here. It's fine to talk to everyone and creating incentives for connecting and collaborating. There's a beautiful, beautiful quote that I always share by a fellow meeting designer from the Netherlands, Monique van Dusseldorp, and it really captures all of this in one statement. A successful conference will make the audience feel something is happening that matters and that they are part of it. So what I talked about in terms of the power core is that we need to convey this what matters. Why are we doing this? I think we all understand that in this specific symposium, we are onto something. This is a very important topic. We all have experiences to share. I'm very much looking forward to hearing your experiences from your previous events, your successes, your failures, and then to understand that we are part of shaping this movement as we go forward, that it's not just a one-off event, but it's a community effort. So here is one tool that I want to share with you that really is a very cost-effective. So we talk also about low budget solutions for associations, smaller NGOs, universities, for basically any meeting you set up, specifically in the virtual space, is to take a sheet of paper or a whiteboard, digital whiteboard, and map your delegates' experience as they go through your planned event. This is called participant experience mapping. I basically adapted this from marketing research, where you have experience journeys through supermarkets or museums. Applying this to events is a very powerful tool and a very simple one. You only need a small team and your first plan, your first sketches of your planned event. What you do is you highlight all the important moments in the event and imagine how certain personae, certain representatives of your community will go through this event, what kind of experiences they will encounter, and how you might be able to enhance these experiences, tweak these experiences, make them more interesting, make them more flawless, make them surprising, make them more emotional. So I'm using this in all of our meeting design projects, and the trick is basically to imagine your virtual conference as a chain of experiences, as a need for engaging storyline, and hopefully coming with a dramatic arc. And all of this is possible with this simple tool, going again through the moments of your event, sketching out the different interactions of a delegate with the event, and trying to enhance these and turn this event into a unique experience. And I think that's where the magic lies in this simple method. I can. One word about hybrid versus virtual events, and I think we are in a tricky situation here. We need hybrid solutions as we move forward, and we still find them very costly. In order to put together a impressive and very well merged, fluid hybrid experience that really connects our live audience, our physical audience with our online audience, we really have to invest not only in technology, but also really in the direction, the dramaturgy, the meeting design. So what I'm suggesting here is that, of course, first of all, we have several different definitions of hybrid going around. We have the very standard broadcasting, online broadcasting of a face-to-face event. But there's one hybrid mix that I think is especially helpful for smaller NGOs, science-driven associations, universities. That is a non-parallel hybrid mix. So focusing on one or several face-to-face meetings that really focus on the power of the human connection, on the social and emotional experiences, on trust building, on collaborating as both on a personal and professional level, and then really enriching this with a chain of virtual meetings where everyone is joining through online platforms, and bringing both together the power of virtual formats for content-driven meetings, for sharing information, for digital collaboration, AI-driven networking, and all year-round engagement with these special occasions for tapping into the power of human connection, is where I currently see, with the state of technology and the cost of hybrid technology, it's where I see the biggest strengths in the hybrid mix. So to close my my presentation with a few recommendations, some do's and some don'ts. What we see in successful virtual events is that scientific organizations manage to create this shared purpose, a story, a context. Why is this cause that we're following together important? Why is it important that we get together and collaborate? I think this is 100% fulfilled in this meeting. I think what's important is to make sure to make the user experience of your delegates flawless, and not just on the technical side, being sure of how your platform works and how your users are interacting with that platform, but also the emotional, the learning user experience, all the things that I hinted at in this user experience journey overview, and really trying to eliminate any frustrations, any low points, any emotional dips, and trying to keep a constant active level of participant engagement, creating these spaces and also incentives for exchange and collaboration. There'll be a networking session here later. There will be panels and so on. So make sure to make use of them. And then again, make sure that you use the pre and post event phases. Don't only focus on the virtual event per se, but use all the pre-communication period and the post-communication period before and after the event to make the most of your content. And last but not least, I think we all should try new experiences. We should try to be surprising in how we set up academic events, and that will attract new audiences. Think about the different generations that we are now dealing with in this broad mix of our target group. Some don'ts. Do not ignore your delegates' personal motivations. I think this is very important. When we talk about face-to-face scientific meetings, we know that there's always, this family aspect. We're meeting old friends. We're getting together at the bar after the event. We can replicate this in virtual meetings as well, and we need to, and we should. So providing these spaces is extremely important. Do not try to copy and paste formats from in-presence events. No large panels with 6 people reading their papers and using hours for that. This will simply not work with the online attention span. Do not overload the sessions per se with heavy content. Try to work with content before the event and after the event, so you can really focus also during the virtual event on the human aspects, on learning, on exchange. Don't assume, and again, this goes to all the smaller organizations with smaller budgets for the events, don't assume that higher budget means higher engagement. A lot of the engagement comes through interesting, attractive planning and giving opportunities and really emphasizing the community element in these events. And last but not least, I think we are we moved beyond the point where we can run events without focusing and insisting on key values such as inclusion, diversity. Virtual events are great for that, on community building and ultimately sustainability. So I'll end with that. Session timer is running out. I'm looking forward to your questions later, and back to Shannon.
Great, thank you so much, Felix. As a reminder to our audience, go ahead and submit your questions for our speakers in the Q&A chat box, and we will move on to the Q&A segment after our next talk, which is by our third keynote speaker, Ms. Kate Whitfield, who is founder and CEO of Zeroverse, which provides strategies and skills for sustainability in academia. She will be speaking today about equity and sustainability of scientific conferences.
So thank you very much, Dr. Debbie Johnson and Professor Judith Klinman, for inviting me to give this presentation. Thank you also to my collaborators who worked with me on this project, so Thale Jarvis, Shannon Weiman, and Angela Ares. And I'd like to extend a particular kudos to Debbie Johnson, Thale Jarvis, and Keystone Symposium in general for sharing their data that we're about to see and for hosting this, what I think is a really important conversation. All right, so as scientists and educators, we are proponents of equity and fairness. But what if our business model is not particularly equitable or fair? And specifically, what if the way that we convene our research communities is neither equitable or fair? So let's have a look at some examples. This is a map, and on the left, you see a picture that's typical for an in-person meeting on the topic of tuberculosis research hosted by Keystone Symposium. What you see on the right is that this map has lit up, and these are the countries where participants are based that took part in the meeting when it went fully virtual online in 2020. And 69 countries here are represented. Digging in a little bit to the data, so the WHO identifies 8 countries as carrying 2/3 of the global incident tuberculosis cases, and here they are listed. In a typical in-person meeting in 2019, 5 of those 8 countries are represented, but no one from Bangladesh, no one from Pakistan is there, no one from the Philippines are there, and overall 51 people are able to participate. In contrast, when it went online, access opened up. We've got about 4 times more people from those highly endemic tuberculosis countries participating. And every single country on that WHO list is there. We've got Bangladesh, we've now got Pakistan, we've now got the Philippines. Let's look at the example of a hybrid conference. So this happened this year. It was in person in the United States and simultaneously streamed live and also available on demand for people to connect virtually. So in the in-person map, what we've got is participants typically from North America and the global north. The people that stayed and accessed it virtually here are largely from the global south. So now we've got people in countries in Latin America. We've got people in countries in Africa and Asia, all able to participate. The picture of this hybrid conference in terms of those 8 tuberculosis countries, we've got only 2 countries that were able to travel and be there in person, totaling 14 people. In contrast, again, many more countries and many more people are connecting virtually. They stuck with the virtual option. So 56 people in total from 6 of those highly endemic tuberculosis countries. So there are a couple of important elements to justice. One is equal opportunity, and another is equal participation. And unfortunately, what the data are telling us is that our classical in-person model is not particularly equitable or fair, but that when we move to a virtual platform, we offer access to many more people in many more corners of the earth, including where it's arguably most important for that theme of research. Another uncomfortable truth for us, and that we should face, I think, is that not only are we not adequately promoting equity and participation, but with the in-person model, we are inadvertently, but now clearly, contributing to climate injustice. So let's look at this data first from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So today, we have warmed up the planet by about 1.1 or 1.2 degrees C. So, as a consequence, today we are experiencing extreme heat events about 4.8 times more likely than in the pre-industrial era. If we continue to warm up the planet and reach 1.5 degrees C, those extreme heat events become more frequent and more likely by 8.6 times. Those extreme heat events themselves are getting hotter. So those record-breaking temperatures that we experienced this year will be broken again and again. And those temperatures themselves are getting hotter. The heat waves will be hotter in the future. So what does this mean for us in science and in education? So did we follow a career in research or education because we had no other choice, or we couldn't think of anything better to do? I think that many of us are driven by a passion for a subject, a curiosity for the world, a wish to do good in general, do something good and benefit society. We're motivated by all of this, but our goals of advancing progress, of perhaps opening doors and minds through education and knowledge, or wanting to add to and help create a happier and healthier and more equitable world, all of those things are undermined with climate change. And I would argue they're even reversed by climate change. So the chart here says future global warming levels. And the frightening reality is that that future is approaching us faster and faster. So today, we face a 50% chance or 50% risk of reaching that 1.5 degrees C of warming in the next 9 years. So how old will you be 9 years from now? Where do you hope to be? What do you hope to be doing? And what about for your loved ones? What will a world at 1.5 degrees C be like for all of us? So this is uncomfortable, but I think we need to face it. This is an example of our own contribution to this global warming and this climate injustice. So, an average in-person meeting on the topic of tuberculosis research attracts about 330 people. In doing so, it generates about 700 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. 0.5% of that is from the ground transportation, 3.5% of that is from the accommodation, and here we have it, 96% of that is from our air travel. So 700 tons is the equivalent of burning 1,621 barrels of oil. And here is what 1 ton looks like in terms of volume. All of this, of course, is just the tip of the iceberg. I had to get that metaphor in. It doesn't represent our entire footprint over the course of a year. It only represents one thematic, one research theme. It doesn't represent all the conferencing that we do collectively as a sector across all our scientific societies. So does this matter to us at all? Does our contribution to climate change matter? So it matters to Aisha, who wants to study medicine in a university in Pakistan, but her home and her school were flooded and destroyed this year. So it's very difficult for her to study. It's very difficult for her to do her homework. It matters to someone I met last week, Tyler Ward, who had to make sure that the students in his care, in his international study program, were safe from dehydration and heat stroke. His students were in the UK this summer, which experienced a heat wave. He had to make sure that they had access to cooling centres. He also had to make sure that the students in his program in Spain were safe from smoke inhalation and the risk of forest fires. Tylo knows that it was the first year he had to care about this, but it certainly won't be the last. It matters to my colleague, Dr. Bartholomew Ondigo, who is a US Institutes of Health and Egerton University postdoc based in Kenya. So the drought in his country is so deep and so chronic that the land is completely dry. So when flooding happened in 2018, almost 200 people died. It matters to thousands of US students who, when they were surveyed, 94% of them said that their universities needed to be doing much more on climate action. It also matters to 233 editors-in-chief of health journals around the world who last year co-wrote a piece and said, as health professionals, we must do all we can to ensure a transition to a more sustainable, fairer, more equitable and healthier world. It matters to me, and I believe it matters to you too. So do we respond? Do we do anything at all? And if we do respond, what are we set to lose? But what could we be set for gaining? We're going to look at the data again. So the virtual conference more than doubled the number of participants. Twice the number of countries were represented, including every single country that the WHO recognizes as highly endemic for tuberculosis. And to coin or to borrow a phrase from the UN SDGs, this model, the virtual model, makes sure that no one is left behind. From a climate justice perspective, the emissions were absolutely smashed. The virtual conference had more than 1,400-fold less carbon dioxide equivalents. The carbon footprint of that meeting was less than 1 ton. Less than half a ton, excuse me. It did all of this and at the same time maintained a high quality scientific score. So in my view, the case for strengthening, investing in, expanding our virtual programming is really clear. The virtual conferencing model has equity, sustainability, inclusion, access, all wrapped up in one. It's all there. I think that we all, including Keystone Symposium, should be proud of our virtual programming. It's your inclusive and global service. It's also your resilient service. It can withstand global disruptions, extreme weather events. It can withstand travel challenges like pandemics or other challenges. For example, people choosing to connect virtually, or other challenges with travel. For example, people choosing to connect virtually because they have to look after family members at home, or they have clinical duties in their hospital, or they have important experiments to run. They may also prefer virtual because of headaches with visas. They may not have the funds or be able to ask someone to pay for their travel. People may choose virtual because they're opting for low carbon lifestyles. So here is a panel from CAST, the Center for Climate Change and Social Transformations. And what it shows is that more people are willing than not to reduce their travel by plane. And that's true in Sweden, in the UK, in Brazil, and in China. And this survey was over 3,500 people. So let us be inspired by what we've seen from Walter and Felix. Let us be inspired by the huge achievements from Keystone Symposium in 2020. We should be proud of our virtual programming. It's our equitable and sustainable service. And I wish that you also proud of yourselves. The next time you talk about the future with your board members, with your colleagues, with your students, and also with your family members, be proud of yourselves that you chose to act and you chose to do something positive. Thanks very much.
Okay, well, thank you all for those really illuminating presentations, and I look forward to our discussion. I see we're getting some questions into the Q&A box, so thank you, audience members. Please remember to vote on others' questions you'd like to hear answered so we can gauge your interest in each one as well. I'd like to start out with a general question for all of you. Over the course of the pandemic, how did you see people's perception and opinions of virtual/hybrid meetings and interfaces change compared to prior to that period of time? Maybe Walter, do you want to?
I'm happy to start.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Felix.
So in what I perceived as an observer of the events market, but also as a conference organizer at that time, there was an enormous spike and an enormous increase in requests and demand for virtual events, obviously, at the very beginning. Also a bit of a lack of information. Everyone was searching for information on how to establish these new meetings best. And I think what we all experienced over the course of the pandemic then is that the interest stalled a little bit and then decreased. And what we're currently seeing, and this might be the next question, is this a huge research in getting back to physical events, which is problematic when we just heard what Kate told us, right? So actually there is no going back to face-to-face meetings, knowing what we know, but there's still this enormous drive in the scientific world and also in the non-scientific professional business events to go back to face-to-face events.
Yeah, and I was going to follow up. Oh, sorry, if you can all also in your answers include, I think, yeah, we are seeing kind of a fading of that enthusiasm now as we re-enter post-pandemic in-person conferences. So how do we still encourage people to engage with these virtual and hybrid formats moving forward? Sorry, go ahead, Walter.
Well, I agree with Felix. From my vantage point, hand in hand with the pandemic was a surge in rolling out of new technology that allows us to be part of virtual environments. And so it's hard to separate how much of the pickup was because of necessity and how much of it was because of excitement about new ways of participating in online virtual events. For example, we started some fully immersive virtual reality online classes at Stanford. They went really well. Some other universities did the same thing. Case Western, for example, for its first-year medical students, had them do their anatomy labs using virtual cadavers and found that the retention of information was superior using the virtual environments as a way of learning because the students were able to learn at their own pace and go back and revisit the information when at any time of the day, which they could not do when they were doing the anatomy lessons at a scheduled time. So, but it's hard to separate how much of the interest was because of new technologies allowing us to do more and how much it was out of necessity. But either way, there's been a big surge. And I agree with Felix. I don't think we're going backwards.
I would add to that, Shannon, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. I mean, I think we've just all experienced that a completely different way of working is actually possible. And to imagine that, the scientific community developed vaccines against COVID without these in-person meetings taking place, right? Fantastic things were possible. And also just to share a co-benefit from the field that I've been working in global health, we saw that those of us based in the global north, we were not sort of traveling like mad, as many of us used to. And it just gave that breathing space for people in the global south to lead their own research as they should be. So some of this behavior, is there's linkages with us being perhaps a little patronizing, and that was an interesting co-benefit that we saw. And other colleagues of mine have said that they felt that more introverted characters were coming forward with Q&A and a little bit more interaction, because it might be easier for many of us to do that behind a screen as opposed to stand up and queue, to get to the microphone. So lots of different interesting co-benefits as well.
It is interesting. We did see that with our Q&A for sure. There were a lot more questions of interest that people submitted from younger, more junior scientists, and the engagement across the spectrum of different career stages as well. And it is interesting that you mentioned we were able to adapt to this virtual world for work. And I think, you see all the articles about people now working remotely after the pandemic and wanting to stick with that, even though they can go back to the office. It seems like for conferences, that is not the case for some reason. People are more willing to travel for those or want to get back to in-person versus the day-to-day office tasks. Why do you think that is? And is there something we can do to kind of really remind them, encourage them that the virtual and hybrid options are beneficial and are something they should consider?
I think the answer... Go ahead, Walter.
From my vantage point, I think one of the reasons people like having some aspect of a conference to go to is to find their future spouse or their future boyfriend or girlfriend, or to connect. There's so much we can do online, but there's some things that we just can't do unless we're together in person. And so there are some strong motivations for reproduction that I think push us to sometimes get together in person.
Interesting.
I was going to say the exact same thing, Walter. There's this missing element that has often been overlooked as a function in scientific conferences, and it's this entire personal motivation of meeting old friends, connecting with the community on a very personal level, hanging out at the bar until the early morning hours. This is what people have been doing and want to go back to doing. So the question is really, how can we replicate this in virtual worlds? And I think a lot has to do with meeting design, with storytelling, there's some examples where you frame an academic conference in an entire different way, as a virtual summit hike, for example, with different stations in cottages, in virtual cottages, where people would hang out at the campfire and have interdisciplinary conversations that are as much about personal drive and passions as about their discipline and their professional interests. So I think we have a lot of tools at hand in terms of storytelling, in terms of how we design these ultimately experiences that can help us replicate that to a certain degree. Not to 100% yet. With the technologies you mentioned, this might be possible, but to a certain degree.
Great, Kate, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, sure. I would also add that it doesn't have to be an either or approach. I think there's still so much joy about meeting in person. And it's not to demonize in-person meetings or demonize flying, but rather we, given what we've learned from the pandemic experience, given what we know about the data and the reality of climate change, it's actually just about being mindful of all of that, being selective about the travel we do. So do we need to travel every month? Do we need that in-person meeting to happen annually, or could it alternate? I think it's just about pre-pandemic. For some of us, hyper travel was kind of the default, and now we just need to think about it, be more selective in what we participate in person.
Great. I'll move on to some audience questions now. Our first question is, I find there is a huge inertia in the world of conference design from scientists. A lot of, this is how we've always been doing it and it's working fine. How do you challenge the status quo in a respectful manner, keeping in mind that redesigning conferences requires time and thought? And I think this can apply to both in-person and virtual and the hybrid kind of interactive format too.
Well,
I'll take that.
Felix might be a good idea. He spoke a lot about activating, which I thought was really interesting. So basically having empathy for your audience, right? And walking yourself through their experience, and then innovating. We can try something, iterate, try it and get feedback, and an iterative process of doing and learning. We're so comfortable with innovation. It's our bread and butter, and we should just apply the same spirit to how we convene and partner with others that are willing to test new approaches with us.
And I always advise organizations, when they start rethinking their scientific events, they don't have to overhaul the entire thing all at once. It's sometimes good to just have one experimental module where you try new things. You see if you achieve your objectives, if your participants are satisfied with this, and then you can expand on that. I think that would be a respectful way to incrementally change. But I think this change is badly needed. We are using the same blueprints that we are, have brought from the 50s and 60s to stay provocative on that end. And you've seen some of the photos that I've shown. These are the general experience in a face-to-face event all around the world. So, yeah, taking it slow, but planning strategically, showing that there are different routes to achieving the same objectives, and keeping the zeitgeist, changing target groups in mind.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah. Go ahead, Walter.
Sure. Well, from my vantage point, I think it's critical that we start exploring and moving forward with new designs for all the reasons that have previously been discussed, for equity, for reducing carbon footprint. But I also think to have more efficient meetings. I think we do need to I think we need to be a bit more aggressive about this, frankly. I think there are ways that work is changing, and it will move over to the conference arena. And I think we need to sort of get ahead of it before the disruption that happens that will come from the tech sector that will give us new ability to do things. But those groups that don't start designing and incorporating it and figuring out what works, what doesn't work, are going to be not innovating and moving things forward. They're going to be trying to catch up. And I think those groups that see that new ways of interacting are already in place and are evolving and can shape it will be in a better position. So I think it's not a matter of how to do it carefully. I think it's a matter of how to do it defensively, because otherwise things are going to, you'll be left behind.
Yeah, I really, that theme of kind of experimenting with new ways to do conferences is a really interesting parallel, and I think that makes sense. And to change one or two smaller aspects of a full meeting at a time would be more manageable for conference organizations, testing out new things, as well as the attendees kind of getting their bearings. But at the same time, evolving forward with new strategies. Speaking of new strategies, with hybrid events, I think a lot of us have been experimenting with different ways to integrate the in-person attendees with the virtual or remote attendees. And I think we've been successful in being able to offer the science and the content to both. But it seems that the interactivity part is a challenge. And whereas in virtual meetings, the interactivity was all within one audience, which was the remote audience, it seems challenging to creatively come up with ideas to get interactions between in-person attendees and remote attendees. Do any of you have any thoughts about how that can be achieved to make these audiences more interactive and more engaged with each other?
I think we have to look to our colleagues and friends in the online gaming community, where they find ways to engage people, leverage the power of storytelling, leverage the power of fun. But there's no reason why we can't have a scavenger hunt, for example, that involves finding things using, many people. We can assume people have, to some degree, smartphones. We could place in the real world virtual objects that maybe you have to team with someone who is in the online world to solve a problem, to have your team be the one that finds the flag. But it can be integrating people in the virtual world with people in the real world, working together to have some fun and to do something. So I think we just have to be creative about how to blend and create fun experiences for people so they can get to know each other, take advantage of each other's skills and work together to solve a problem.
That's a really fun idea. Hope to be able to do it soon with our attendees. Felix, did you have anything to add?
I was very excited about the potential of hybrid experiences and events for a long time. And then I was involved in producing some, and I found out it's incredibly tough to deliver a polished hybrid event that is, satisfies the needs of on-site delegates and online delegates at the same time, while allowing them to mingle and exchange across these two different media or dimensions. I found that you need to do this properly. You need two different direction tracks, two different schedules basically that overlap at certain amounts of time. You need the technology, and you can do that, but this is then down to an increase in a production budget that in most cases in the field and organizations do not have available. Therefore, I think what was mentioned before, and in the case that Kate mentioned, the broadcasting option is simple, is a good way to allow remote audiences participation. You can use, of course, Slido, online polling systems, and other ways to integrate that are a bit higher level than just chat and text chat. This can already be very helpful for activating interaction. But I really want to make a point again and argue for the distributed solution, a series of smaller networked face-to-face events that are connected with online interactions over time. And in my experience and the organizations that I worked with, this has been extremely successful in bringing people from different continents together, and giving different opportunities and time to connect, and then still allowing on-site personal meetings in the different hubs. So you don't have to travel far. You can stay in your cities. Desynchronized hybrid solutions, you can call that.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking a little bit about, if you were hosting a party or hosting, having a wedding, and you had, you were going to do it hybrid, it would be a real headache, right? You'd have these two audiences. You need to offer something special to both. So in the vein that Felix was describing, setting up sort of scheduling one-to-one interactions, perhaps for the virtual participants, with some of those VIPs that are attending, with the journal editors, the funders, the thought leaders. So, you get a chance for 10, 15 minutes one-to-one on your Zoom connection or whatever it is, with some of those people, or small group discussions, as Felix said, at different time zones. So offering something special to the different audiences, and not having the virtual component as a kind of a second class offering or as a kind of incidental thing, but actually thinking with empathy about what is interesting for that audience.
Yeah, that asynchronous hybrid style is interesting, and actually leads into one of our audience questions about how do you overcome time zone differences for global, virtual, and hybrid conferences? Are there other ideas you have for kind of bridging those time zone issues?
Coffee is a good one.
Yeah,
so
it's like 1 a.m. for you right now. So
yeah, but it just really helped that I was able to pre-record, just simple things like that. I'm not sure that I really have the answers, but again, exploiting what Felix is raising, that it doesn't have to be a one-shot program in one period of time. You can have a number of interactions that are more favorable for your different people in the audience. over a few days, for example. That would help, certainly.
I think if the goal of a conference is to convene, connect, and to inform, the information part, we can leverage the power of different time zones by having different speakers present at different times, have the information be recordable and playbackable at different in other time zones. There's a way to leverage and make the fact that people are in different time zones provide more ways of being together and connecting with different groups. So I think it is a challenge, but I think, as Felix has pointed out, that design can help us here, and we can make the fact that we have a hybrid. If we have a hybrid meeting, we can have things be pre-recorded, as Kate did, available 24/7 for a conference that goes round the clock, with people checking in for different times. It's just a matter of sort of changing the way we look at what a conference should be. But frankly, when I fly to another time zone to give a talk, I'm often at a disadvantage because I'm out of sync with the other people who are physically there. So have a conference that takes place over a 24-hour period where everybody can come in when they're at their peak, share information, listen to other information that was presented earlier when they're alert, I think would, and give their presentations when they're alert, I think would actually be an advantage.
Interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of times we do think about the time zone issue with virtual, but we forget when we actually have to travel, we have the jet lag issue, which is a similar kind of challenge for attendees. Felix.
In 2020, I was faced with the task of digitizing the conference, this international science conference that I mentioned on my first slide, the Falling Walls Conference in Berlin. It's an annual conference with 800 people, Nobel laureates, high-level speakers, young and old. And what we did, basically, we dismantled the entire concept of a 2-day conference and turned it into a 10-day TV program with networking opportunities, with online AI-powered networking, with breakouts, etc. But it was basically over 10 days, 12-hour full program presentations by hundreds of scientists, young and old science engagement professionals, with a global hour at a compatible time zone at I think around 1 p.m. CEST, so that everyone would get the essentials and get an overview of the program. That was the offer to all the time zones, and for the rest of the time, people could join whenever they were able to, or watch it all on demand. That's, of course, another beauty of virtual, that you can watch it afterwards.
Very true. One of our audience members has a question about the kind of satellite hub and spoke kind of meeting format. And what would the relative impact of satellite locations be versus requiring all attendees to travel to a single location for in-person, with regards to maybe carbon footprint and all these integrative features? Okay, do you have an idea of how that might impact carbon footprint?
So the location of a meeting relative to the audience, of course, does matter. In my field of global health, a meeting just took place last month, approximately 5,000 people. It's often on the East Coast of the United States, and this year it was in Seattle. That's just going to bump up your carbon emissions overall, because either people are traveling from within the States, and those people traveling from Europe, from Africa, are just going to be doing 4 hours-ish more travel. So it does matter. And then so having your regional hubs can help, particularly if those hubs are accessible by overland transportation, particularly train. That can really help. So that is definitely one option.
Great. Anyone else?
I would also apply Walter's method of looking beyond our own sector to different industries. And if we look to the corporate world, these multi-hub, so-called multi-hub solutions are already well established. I know that Siemens here in Germany, of course, global corporate organization, they have synchronized multi-hub events. So they link up employees in their global sites at the same time, using high-powered latest gen technology to bring them together at the same time and eliminate any travel costs. So that would, lead to the same carbon footprint, I guess, or very similar to a complete virtual event.
Great. Walter, do you have anything to add?
Well, just that I think maybe we'll see people who do satellite hub hopping, where they'll go to one hub for one event and go to another hub for another event to learn virtual, the different regions and their differences. No, I think it's a wonderful model that facilitates the reducing cost and carbon footprint, and yet providing a way for people to get together in person, yet also be connected. So I love that design.
Great. A question that's kind of come up in a few different ways here is how, because as we discussed before, it seems people are getting a little bit more reluctant these days to going virtually or doing the hybrid options. How can scientific societies who are holding meetings advocate for these virtual options to both, in our case, we have scientific organizers who they want to have their meeting in person and no compromise there. Like, we just feel so strongly that we are not interested in virtual, as well as attendees, getting them excited about the virtual or hybrid option. So not just internally making that decision as an organization, but having our attendees and constituents kind of also be on board with that.
For me, it's a matter of showing the value, and some of the information that Kate presented, for example, is very persuasive. But also, if we can say this will allow you to reach more people at a lower cost, and or put that extra funding into bringing in underserved groups that should be at the conference, I think it's a matter of just sort of understanding the value and then presenting it in a compelling way. And that's how you persuade people. And I think that it's a matter of collecting the data, doing the analysis, and then thinking creatively about why this will be better. And then, and if it is better for that particular organization, and then just sell it, really.
Yeah, I agree with Walter. I think there's a lot about how we frame it, how we brand it, actually, and going green is the cool thing, right? It's certainly, different groups are really attracted by the sustainable choices and the sustainable brands. Simple things like registration, if you're offering a hybrid event, registration for both virtual and in person tracks is available at the same time. But I do think that there can be like almost a fear that, if you're a scientific organizer of one of these events, you're kind of throwing a party, right? And you want people to come, you want people to show up, you're trying to attract people. So I think there is a fear that people won't come if it's virtual, and that would be a huge disappointment, of course. And if you offer this parallel track through a hybrid, then people will opt for that rather than show up, and you won't have that, nice in-person feeling. So I think sometimes there is a kind of a fear that people won't show up to your party. And again, just repeating what Walter said, that it's about framing it in a positive way, branding it, and actually the virtual component, I think, is the growth area. More and more people are going to be attracted to that as time goes by.
I'll just add that when it comes to convincing organizations in favor of virtual events, I think providing the choice, but educating about the differences, just like Kate did today. This is the exact numbers for the carbon footprint of your physical event and for your virtual event. You can choose, but then again, I think on the long term, we'll only convince participants, delegates, scientists with more attractive event formats. And Kate, you mentioned the word party a few times. If we can get across the message that this is an output-oriented scientific exchange format, right? We're talking about papers and posters and some of the things we maybe need to discuss today, because digitizing papers and posters and giving access to them over a long time sustainably is another major advantage of digital events. But ultimately, I'm going back to my main point. We need to make these events more attractive, a little bit like a party, a little bit like a social event you would attend. And why not? And this dry environment with dry presentations, with matter-of-factly mood, I think we have to see it as a bit broader. Experiment has been mentioned, and we won't be able to convince people otherwise if we don't tackle this key problem of attraction and incentives.
Mm-hmm. That kind of brings us to a question about, the fact that we rely on the in-person attendance often for the financial viability of the conference. And currently the hybrid or virtual attendance is not nothing, but it's not huge. So it can't necessarily cover the costs of doing so. What do you guys see as a sustainable way for organizations to be able to offer that as hopefully that audience grows to be able to then cover its own costs? But in the interim, organizations are having to invest more than those options are bringing in when it comes to allowing remote participation.
Well, for this situation, time is on our side. The cost of and ways of doing hybrid events will be coming down as technology improves, and also as more, as we see hybrid events occur in our work environment more, our educational environment, as this becomes, something not just for scientific conferences, but for the way we do things, it will become a lot easier. And I think it really, to Felix's theme, it's really a matter of good design. And I think if one can model out how many more people one can reach and what the right pricing is to be able to cover the cost of reaching and having more people attend, it's a matter of business engineering and also anticipating change and also looking downstream. If you don't invest in making this change, even if it maybe costs a little bit of money now, where will you be vis-a-vis other conferences that people may choose to start going to over yours because they provide greater access? So it's a matter of analysis and thinking and design.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on, Walter. So it's a little bit longer term thinking, adapting our business model. So innovation again, right? But in the business paradigm that we're operating, I would offer that, in a similar vein, universities and other academic institutions are thinking critically about their air travel. And I've seen one really interesting new travel policy from the University of Oxford in the UK. There are a number of things in the policy around prioritizing train travel, prioritizing virtual attendance. And actually, if people do choose to fly, they need to pay a levy of, I think it's £35 on each ton carbon dioxide equivalent that air travel will generate. And that doesn't disappear outside of the organization to some carbon offsetting program that is invested back in to the sustainability agenda and the sustainability program of the university. So we could take, ideas like that to help finance some of this investment that's needed. And I'd also maybe offer, novel funding streams and novel sources of sponsorship out there. So it's not just, the academic sphere that's interested in decarbonizing, private sector, all sorts of stakeholders and players are wanting to shrink and reduce their own footprint and are looking for partners doing the same. So, your virtual or your hybrid offering might be a fantastic place to find novel sponsors and potentially new financing streams.
I really love that. One observation is, of course, that the cost for travel by plane, especially, but also with other modes, should be higher. If we took into account the carbon emissions, etc. But they are not yet. And until then, regulations will come sooner or later that will increase the prices for in-presence events. They are already, by the way, in the entire meetings events market, costs for running events are going up. So I would agree with Walter that time is on our side also in that respect. And I love these creative approaches in setting systemic incentives, using larger platforms like universities, associations to set a new tone, a new culture that will more or less equalize the current situation in terms of incentives, penalties.
This is an opportunity to be very creative, and I think we can get some hybrid vigor. For example, if we were to take the hub and spoke model and maybe co-conference with a adjacent field to a particular theme of a conference where, because we can bring in people to meet physically and also have people meet virtually, why not have team with a few other conferences, share not necessarily the content, but share the fun part where you can meet at a satellite physical location, do something with someone who is not in your field, but in a nearby field, or maybe a completely different field. So the recreational socializing part could be more diverse, and the knowledge transfer part could be specific. There's ways we can leverage this new way of meeting in a way that allows us to do things that we couldn't do before. And I think that's what we need to lean in on is what is amazing that we can do by these new models, and emphasize that as a way of growing attendance and making things more productive.
Great. Well, we're nearing the end of our time today, so I want to kind of go through and ask each of you, is there anything that you didn't get to share yet that you really want to share with our audience, or any concluding thoughts from you today about this discussion and to kick off the meeting?
Well, my only observation would be... Go ahead, Kate. We have a little bit of a lag in here. Go ahead.
There's a time difference between Japan and Germany. I would just maybe offer that I think, being conscious and facing the difficulties, the harsh realities and the challenges, but framing this in an upbeat, positive way. There's so much to be gained. It's an opportunity, and let's, innovate. It's what we do best. and let's apply it to this challenge.
And I would add to that for this initial session, I think the organizers did a really good job in bringing the different perspectives together that are needed to solve this challenge right now. That is the sustainability lens, that is first and foremost the one that we need right now. The technology that will bring us a lot of solutions and has already brought us a lot of solutions, facilitating that exchange in the future. And then the human side that often overlooked, hopefully will come back into play even more. So this was a very well-rounded first conversation I had.
I think in terms of things that I did not have a chance to go into before, I did some work maybe 10 years ago working with some combat veterans who had post-traumatic stress. And when I asked them about, and we were using virtual environments as for exposure therapy to help treat their clinical condition. When I asked them how they stayed in touch with their friends and their family when they were deployed, I expected they would say, well, we would have phone calls or we would do video conferences. They said, no, we met in World of Warcraft, one of the multi-user online environments. And when I asked, well, why did you meet your mom or your sister in World of Warcraft? Are they gamers too? They said, no, but we could do things. We could go for a walk. Instead of just talking and looking at each other's face or just hearing each other's voice, we could walk around and do something, turn over some rocks or see what's over here. The point is that I think as technology evolves and as scientific conferences, scientists are pretty creative. And I think we can take what is new about technology that allows us to do amazing things that we otherwise can't do, build experiences that are more robust, more refined, more creative, more informative by evolving how we do our conferences. As Felix pointed out earlier, things haven't changed for a long time, but now we can. And I think we can get ahead of the curve and be the innovators to show the rest of the conference world, one way to go.
Well, thank you all so much. You've given us a lot of food for thought here, a lot of creative ideas to pursue, and we hope to see you at the networking lounge and at the other events during the meeting. Thank you so much for your time. Now, as we wrap up this session, we'd like to show some of the polling results that we took earlier when we started. Mitch, if you can put some of those up on screen. So we've got a breakdown of who's attending as a organizer of scientific conferences versus as an attendee or both. And our next poll. And who is taking climate change and their carbon footprint into account when deciding about traveling for meetings. Impressively, almost 77% of the audience, so that's great. Everyone's got that on their mind. Please note that all the sessions for the conference will be available on demand after the event, likely by the end of the week. Again, that was all open access, so if you think of anyone who who find any of this content interesting or useful, please share. We will now take a 30-minute break and see you back here at 1:30 p.m. Eastern for our next session on best practices, challenges, and solutions for virtual conferencing. See you soon.